Hello, and welcome to the FanFiction Book Club podcast, a weekly podcast that explores the good, bad, and the cringy of fanfiction, hosted by me, Tstan, and my lovely co-hosts, Poppy,
Hello.
Ollie,
Hello.
and SG.
Howdy there.
Every month, we scour the internet to bring you 4 different fanfic reads, and our theme this month is Cinderella. Check out our website at fanfictionbookclub.com or follow us on Twitter and Instagram at fanfictionados with a full lineup of stories for the month and connect with us on the web. So, this week we have War of Hearts by Perennial on Archive of Our Own. Looks like it was completed in 2018, and it's a little over 8,000 words.
Yeah, so it was a pretty short one this time.
Yeah,
Which was nice.
Yeah. This was my pick, and gotta say, a little proud.
Yeah. Why did you pick it?
It wasn't awful.
I picked it because it was a subversion while not being a funny subversion. The whole point of this story is Cinderella. It's the whole Cinderella story up until the point of the ball, and instead of falling in love with the prince, she falls in love with the king. I don't know, it's very mature, and I enjoyed it. It was like a breath of fresh air sometimes.
Yeah. So the nice thing about this story is it's on Archive of Our Own. So there's like a whole breakdown of tags and characters and fandoms that it relates to. So relationships are Cinderella and the king, Cinderella and the prince, and the additional tags for this are fairy tale retellings, canon divergence, older man, younger woman, engagement of convenience, falling in love, and then in parentheses with the wrong person, which I assume is not an official tag.
Oh, you know everybody makes up tags. It's ridiculous.
Yes.
So, the author's summary reads, "She dances and doesn't lose a shoe. The clock strikes and she doesn't run away. Her future is secured well before midnight, or so she believes." And she also has some notes here, the author has some notes here. And I believe it is just a link to Ruel's War of Hearts song, which is very good, by the way. So, this story it's interesting because there's no talking in this story, but it kind of details how Cinderella comes from, she doesn't leave the ball. And she and the prince get engaged immediately, and it talks through basically her living her life in the castle, learning how this works. At the same time, she's falling in love with the king rather than the prince. Because really, the whole point is that she's doing the prince for convenience, like a safe haven. But she's falling in love with the king, and they're doing their best to kind of like do a little dance, try not to actually fall in love, but that doesn't work.
And I think something about the story is it doesn't give away that the king and Cinderella are in love with each other. For me, at least, it was like with their like glances at each other, it made it seem like because Cinderella's keeping the secret that she was abused, a servant for her step family. And to me, it seemed like the king knew. And, like, that's why he kept giving her those looks. But then as time went on, it was like, oh, no, they're just in love with each other.
Oh, interesting. Interesting perspective, Poppy, because I did not make that connection at all while I was reading it. I read the tags at the top for older man. But I didn't necessarily
I did not.
I didn't necessarily think older man meant the king. I thought, oh, well, maybe Prince Kit is an older man.
I was just gonna say, I'm super like religious about reading every tag before touching something. So the suspense was not there, though I did enjoy it anyway. So
I think even if the suspense even if you already knew, I think the author, like you said when you were kind of introducing the book, the author introduced that relationship in such a mature and subtle way. That
yeah,
you could almost be like for the
real.
first, yeah, you can almost be like for the first third, is this just a human to human interest? Is this a sexual interest? Is this a wariness of her because it's his he doesn't know anything about this girl that's going to marry his son. I personally really enjoyed this story. It was really short, and it was lacking in dialogue. It's a style of writing and exposition that I see in a lot of more mature fairy tales, where they just kind of tell the story and you get it through body language and the description of settings, instead of through dialogue between characters. So I've always enjoyed that type of writing. You can get really poetic with it, and I think there were some really poetic moments in the descriptions for the story. So I really liked it, and it was a big breath of fresh air compared to Once Upon a Trailer Park.
Quite the opposite story.
Yeah, completely in a different direction. But I really enjoyed it, and I'm amazed that I enjoyed it and that it was able to complete a thought as well as it did for only being 8,000 words.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they did really great descriptions of like their interactions with her and the prince, or her and the king, and like just the scenery. There was like a part where they describe like the nature of the garden or something. It was like, oh, that's really beautiful. Let me reread that again.
Okay, let me verify real quick, or let me clarify real quick. There is dialogue. However, it's very
little, tiny bits
compared to
little teeny tiny bits of dialogue, and it's not dialogue.
It's more at the end.
Yeah.
So there's, I don't know. I feel like we should find some excerpt from the story to read, just so people can get how beautifully this is written.
This is about, I want to say, 3/4 of the way through. The estate was regal once, but has fallen into disrepair. There are no signs of life beyond the chickadees flitting from tree to tree. Fallen leaves crunch beneath approaching hooves. The rider dismounts and leads the horse towards the main door, which turned out to be locked. An inspection of the nearby windows reveals a broken latch, and with some straining against the warped wood, he slides it open and swings inside. Inside, the state is no better. A chandelier hangs haphazardly over the entry hall. Stained mirrors reflect cracked tiles and bubbling plaster. His boots leave fingerprints, or his boots leave footprints in the dust. Each room contains more of the same. Creaking doors stir up dust and set sun-stained curtains fluttering. The house is furnished. There are still personal effects scattered here and there, as though the occupants intended to return instead of vanishing like ghosts. In the study, he finds an old invitation to a ball at the palace. That was one of my favorite descriptions of the entire story.
Which is beautiful. I love this author's attention to detail. But you know how you can add detail and then you can add too much, you kind of get into the J.R.R. Not the J.R.R. the J.R.R. Martin or the J.R. Tolkien or...
Yeah, Tolkien. His, like, passages of...
Yeah, it's just
plants.
like 3 pages to describe a gate.
Yeah, it was a little bit unnecessary.
It becomes
and I found myself skimming because of that.
In Tolkien or this?
In this story, it was like, yes, it was beautifully written, but like, I just wanted it to like have a climax, sort of, you know, like there's supposed to be an apex of something, but it was just all description, no action. It was just very subtle details. Subdued. I don't know. I found myself skimming.
Did you? Ollie, you're the English major in the group. I thought you would have like fallen in love with this.
I was in a little bit of the same boat. I mean, I did enjoy it a lot, but yes, I did find myself skimming until I found a part. Well, like not like true skimming, but I was just like, okay, well, like I don't know how to describe it. So I noticed. So the author uses a lot of pronouns. I don't think they mentioned Cinderella by name at all. And they just say the prince and the king. And they say he, she, all that. And there was only one point where I was really confused about which he that the author was talking about. Because both the prince and the king were there. It's like Cinderella and the prince were like riding horses. And the king comes in and like helps Cinderella down from her horse. But I was really confused because they just said he, and I was like, well, is the prince helping her or is the king helping her? And I was just, yeah, that was like the one point where I was like, huh, what's going on?
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, other than that, I was like, okay, I got it. But
yeah, I found that problem too, mainly because I didn't exactly read the tags either. So I kept assuming that it was her and the prince. And then I got myself confused because it would say king and then it would say he. And then I was like, wait, you mean the prince? So I got confused.
Yeah.
I was in the same boat.
Did you guys think that the transfer of romantic interest from the prince to the king was believable?
You know, I'm gonna take this and say yes, only because I don't know if it's made super clear in the beginning, but I got the impression that she never loved the prince. I'm sorry, him. God, loved the prince in the first place.
He was more of an advantageous match.
Yeah,
she was just able to catch the eye of.
Yeah, and the impression I got was that she was willing to fall in love with the prince, but she hadn't gotten there yet.
And do you think that...
I think that's fairly believable for a story about someone who met somebody one night.
Yeah. Because how long do you think this is spanning their time in the palace? That she's kind of coming to this point where she's acknowledging that she has feelings for the king, and the king is acknowledging and acting on his feelings for her. Do you think, is it like 6 months? Is it a year? Is it like how long?
I know
It seems like it was going on for a couple months to me.
There's a season change, but it's not specific on how long.
Yeah, it was really vague. And I liked in this story how the story was told in different days, like different little snippets of her time there, instead of just being a continuous flow of this day this happened and that day that happened. It just kind of showed us little snapshots. The timeline is vague, but the fact that it's vague makes it more believable that it's on the longer side of things.
Agreed.
And the king, his wife died?
Believe so, yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So he's been single for a while.
Sorry, I don't think that they mention it specifically, but I think there's an illusion that she died when the prince was little or something. So it's been a while.
Okay. Because it's been a bit since I read this story, so I'm trying to remember, was there like a catalyst moment or anything between Cinderella and the king other than when he went to see her?
Go right ahead. Poppy, go right ahead.
Yeah, well, there is a point, yes, where Cinderella goes down into the garden and the king is there. And I don't know if she knew that he was there, but she goes and she sees him and she locks the door behind her. And as soon as she locks the door, the king walks over to her and they start making out.
Oh, that's right. That did happen. I couldn't remember if there was something
it was
before
more poetic
that.
than that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's like caressing and whatever, but like
keeping it teen.
No, they
rated teen.
They kiss him. They make it out.
But I just wonder, like, I'm just trying to think of, because this is a really good story. Is it just like it's just attraction that they have for each other? Like, it doesn't seem like there's any real moment of them connecting over a shared experience or ideology or anything.
I feel
like it just seems like stolen glances and stuff. Like it's all physical.
Felt like it was like love at first sight, but not with the prince, but with the king. All glances and like
and it seemed like it was like glances, but they're like, no, nothing can happen. But then there's a point where it's implied that Cinderella's stepmother and stepsisters break into the castle to assassinate her, I guess, and goes to see the king and says that she was afraid that they had gotten him. And like that, I think, was kind of a turning point for their relationship.
Okay.
Because that was before they kissed, and it showed that she was really concerned about him and his safety. And he was like, oh, oh, okay.
So, so they have their relationship, and then I guess is it the Cinderella and Kit's marriage is coming up, and the king leaves on a trip?
he leaves after they kiss because he's like, I shouldn't be here for this, for their wedding. And then Cinderella's like, okay, I'm going to try to make this work with the prince. But as soon as he leaves, she's like, there's no reason for me to be here anymore. And so she leaves. And the prince is like, no, wait, please stay with me. I love you. And she's like, I don't love you, though. And so she leaves. She has presumably moved back into her house that she lived in with her stepfamily.
Yes.
And she turned it into like an orphanage care home.
A shoe where they make shoes.
What?
Yes.
They make shoes, but it's like for people. It's like a refuge, but like when people come to the refuge, they can make shoes there.
Her moving back to the house is right before that passage I read about.
Yeah, because he's going back to see her.
Because the king is going there.
Yeah,
we're gonna do the pronoun
king
game.
is going back to see her. Yes, and so the king, the king went on that trip because his son, the prince, was going to marry Cinderella. That didn't end up happening. Cinderella left. The king goes to Cinderella and tells her that he wants to be with her, and they kind of figure out a plan to be together and respect the prince's his loss in losing Cinderella, which I think was very elegantly done. I appreciate that they cared about Kit's feelings, because in some of these stories, characters will just go on these mad, passionate love affairs and not care about the people around them. And I appreciate that the king is realistic and compassionate about how to approach this possible opportunity to fulfill this romantic desire that he has with Cinderella.
It was
agreed.
It was also really nice that they also addressed that the kingdom, Cinderella was concerned that the kingdom would think that she was just trying to find the fastest way to be queen. And so she left. She was really hesitant about starting anything with the king because of that and because of the prince's feelings. But then it turns out the prince gets engaged to someone else, and they're like, okay, let's wait until the prince is married, wait for a couple months for this all to blow over, and then we can
a very PC way to start their relationship. I'm amazed that he could even get away with it in any
It was very responsible.
It was very responsible.
Like this story was the most responsible fanfic I've ever read in my entire life.
That's the great thing about AO3 is you can find some really well written, well thought out, very mature stories on there. And I'm amazed that they were able to pack as much as they have into 8,000 words. Yeah. So in terms of the... Oh, wait, did we have any more kind of plot comments or thoughts?
Well, I was going to see if you guys got a sense of how old the king actually is, because I assumed he was like a lot older, but I think they made a comment that his hair is like still golden. So I wonder if he's like an old king or like a younger king.
The impression I got was that he was like maybe in his 50s at most, because that would be, I think they mentioned him being twice her age. And I don't think Cinderella is supposed to be more than 20 to 25. And that would also be a reason why he would still have his, not as much gray hair. And
I was trying really hard not to picture him as the king from the cartoon. Like
the short white haired.
I don't even remember what the king from the cartoon looks like.
Oh God, he looks kind of like a gnome, to be honest.
I guess I'll have to look him up on my phone. Because I guess, Tristan, if you're asking about age, I guess we have to think about it. Is it age in our modern sense of age, or back in the medieval Renaissance times? Because people only lived until they were 50, 60 years old. So she could have been like 18, possibly, and maybe the prince is in his mid-20s, and women married much younger. And I imagine the king might have been in his late 40s, possibly.
With how mature the story is written, I just see it as like an older Cinderella. I don't know. It might just be the fact that we're a little older, so it's like thinking of an 18-year-old Cinderella now is like, no, that is a child.
Yes, she's very aware of herself and how to play her surroundings in a way that I don't think a mousy servant girl would. Because there are a lot of moments in this story where she understood social cues in a very mature way, in a very nuanced way that like an 18-year-old wouldn't. So I can totally see her being older, but for that timeline, I don't know. You'd think she'd be younger, but she definitely seemed mature, and like maybe her history wasn't necessarily the same as the original fandom Cinderella history. Because, I mean, there was a point in Cinderella's childhood, even in the original story, where it was just her and her father after her mother died, and he married this evil stepmother and had the evil stepsisters. Like, depending on when that switch happened, she could have possibly had, because was he a nobleman?
I think he was a wealthier man, and that's why the stepmother married him in the first place.
So then she would have, depending on how progressive he was, she would have had more of an educational background in her upbringing. She would have been exposed to how you interact with individuals at court, or whatever level of court his status allowed him to be involved in. She had kind of a quiet confidence about her, with how she carried herself and how she thought about things. And
I think that she was a little older, maybe she's probably like 21, 22 probably in this story. And then the king was probably at least 25 years older than her.
Is Charming the only son in this story?
I think in this story,
Cinderella.
yes.
I think in the original canon, he's his only son.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard of him having brothers.
Because he'd have to be the firstborn to be able to marry her and become the
still
king.
Be king. Yeah. Yeah, usually it goes to the firstborn.
Yeah, so he's at least the firstborn, but I'm pretty sure he's an only child.
And the prince kind of had a non-role in this story. He was really just kind of mentioned. There wasn't any real interactions between him and Cinderella, other than when she told him it wasn't going to work for them to be together.
Well, no, there was interactions with them when they first met.
Was there? It kind of seemed like it was just talked about in passing. Like it was like they danced, and then
they sat next to each other at dinner. There's the line where he reassured her because she was nervous, and he reassured her after the castle break-in. He was comforting her and everything, and then they broke up. So they didn't interact a whole lot. It was more focused on her and the king.
What did you guys think of the prince? Do you feel bad for him? I
do feel bad for him because it seemed like he loved her, and he wasn't a bad person at all. No. He just wasn't the one for Cinderella, and I felt really bad for him.
Yeah, I feel like she kind of strung him along.
She definitely strung him along.
And the way she ended it was a little like, yeah, I'm just not that into you. And it's just like, all right.
I'm going to go home now that my stepfamily's dead.
Yeah.
Right. Cash in on this property.
He probably knew, like the prince probably knew. Like they just left her like, what's going on? And everyone's just like, stay in your room.
Yeah.
And they did leave it ambiguous, but the fact that it was 3 invaders, and it's implied that it's her family.
To the audience, it's implied, but like no one told her that the intruders were your family.
And I don't think that they knew, because she didn't tell anybody that she came from.
No, she was very hush-hush about her history.
She told everyone that she was trapped abroad with her godmother. And that her father was a nobleman, but was dead. But she didn't say anything about her stepfamily.
Yeah, she was really quiet about it. I thought when the story first started, I thought something was going to expose her, but that wasn't even brought up.
I was just going to say that something that's always kind of bothered me about some forms of Cinderella stories is that's always like, oh, you're just a servant girl. It doesn't, you couldn't possibly marry the prince. Her dad was the noble or merchant or whatever. Like, she still is.
Technically, yeah, she still is technically. But I don't know if your parents are dead and there's no living relative in your line that has that same status. I don't know if that matters still. I don't know if you lose your status when that person, unless you inherit their wealth, if that person dies or something.
That is so beyond me, but yes, I do agree that it struck me as strange. It's like, it doesn't super matter.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But you'd think they'd bring it up one way or another. Because then someone might get the impression that this is just like the most progressive kingdom on the planet. To let the king just marry any person they want, or let the prince marry whoever they desire. Because that wasn't usually the case. You don't just get to marry for love. It was marriages were secured for land and alliances with other territories and kingdoms. So yeah, it would be interesting because they did discuss maturely and responsibly kind of how would us being together work, and if Cinderella brings up the point of, oh, they think I just want to be queen. Well, what if the townspeople think, well, she's nothing? I think that would have been an interesting thing to explore. Not necessarily in this fic, but in a separate fic. And then I guess the last thing to kind of go over is how well did they stick to the fandom? I think they stuck pretty well to it.
Yeah, they took a part of the story that we don't ever get to see. So it could be anything.
Yeah. And it's very much still in that world. It's not an AU or anything. In fandoms, the most common types of fandoms that you see are fandoms that are either two of the author's favorite characters getting together in a way that they, usually romantically, in a way that they imagine in their heads, or if a reader isn't necessarily satisfied with the end of a story or wants to learn more about a story, their fan fiction is continuing on with that story to give themselves more closure. And so this story falls into that second most common realm of the actual stories over what happens afterwards. Because I'm always curious about that with stories, and it's great that there are people on the internet who actually take the time and ask that question and go through the trouble of writing like full-length fictional stories to explore those ideas. And you don't have to pay for it.
Plus bonus.
Extra bonus there. So, any other kind of like closing thoughts that you guys have?
I think so.
No, I think we're good.
Cool.
We covered a lot.
What rating would you guys give this story out of 5 glass slippers?
Give it 4.
What about you, Ollie?
Thinking. I want to give it okay, like a 4, but maybe like a 3.5 glass slippers, only because it was a little short. I wanted a little more dialogue. I wanted something to happen rather than just describing their love for each other. But it was really well written, and I really appreciated that. So 3.5.
Yes, I would give this story. I'm just gonna give it a 5 out of 5 glass slippers because this is right up my alley. I mean, I'm a fan of all different types of fiction, but all different types of writing, and this is a style of writing that is so beautiful to me that really just explores describing scenery, describing character interactions. It's all about what people are doing versus what they're saying. which is always really interesting to me. And this is a really common thing in romanticized fantasy stories. Another really great fan fiction on Cinderella is Ash by Miranda Lowe. Not Miranda, Ash by Miranda Lowe. And she writes a really good story that is mostly exposition with a little bit of dialogue that's kind of along these lines. Hers is more YA. It's not as mature as this story, but it kind of has the same vibe to it. And it's also a Cinderella fanfic, so check that out. It's a really good book. But yeah, I think I'm going to take the jump to 5 because I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. And it was a big breath of fresh air compared to what's my trailer park. Oh, God. So yeah, that's my rating. What about you, Tristan?
I think I'm going to give it a 4. I'm a sucker for these kind of things. Just falling in love by living with someone kind of stories. 10 out of 10 in my book. But honestly, if it wasn't so well written, I would have wanted it to be longer. And I know that's a weird sentence.
No, but I totally agree with you.
The author wrapped it up so well that I'm not mad at how long it was. But gosh, reading a longer fic kind of in this vein would be choice.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So.
And I'm sure there are ones like that out there. It's just, I mean, there's so much fanfic on the internet to get through it all and find it. Like I found some amazing gems in different fandoms, like stories that they should be published, but they're not, just because they're fanfics and it was just that person's side project. But yeah, it's really nice to see writing like that, not self-insertion Twilight or something like that.
Twilight you.
We may get more into that.
Oh, we'll definitely get more into that.
Lovely back burner.
But just to show the breadth of types of stories that are out there on the internet for your enjoyment, that are just free and open to the public to read.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for listening to the Fan Fiction Book Club. Our pick this week was War of Hearts by Perennial. You can find this story and more of the author's works on archiveofourown.org. Theme song is Funkorama by Kevin MacLeod. You can find more of Kevin's music on incompetech.filmmusic.io/artist/Kevin-MacLeod. The works discussed on the Fanfiction Book Club are not our own. All characters mentioned belong to their original authors. Here we go.
See you guys next week.
Cheers. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.